To a small village by the Sea of Galilee, there lived a group of people in peace, but they always felt something was missing. They didn't lack food or clothing, but in their hearts, there was always an emptiness, as though they lacked a light or a reason to truly live meaningfully. It was at this moment that Jesus appeared in their lives. None of them knew that a stranger was traveling through the villages, carrying with him a powerful message filled with love and compassion. Jesus did not come with sermons from a high place, but came to the hearts of each individual, making them feel the unconditional love he brought. One spring morning, as the sun rose high and its light spread across the village, Jesus came to the crowd gathering in the market. The crowd hardly noticed him, as they were used to hearing others preach about religion. But the presence of Jesus made the atmosphere in the place different. Jesus walked toward them, his eyes filled with compassion and gentleness, and he began to speak in a voice that was warm, spreading like a gentle breeze. "Listen to this," Jesus began. "You know that love is the essence of life. Love is what I bring to you. But love is not just words. It is actions, forgiveness, and unconditional sacrifice." His words made everyone stop and listen. Each person had questions in their hearts but did not know how to ask. They were searching for meaning in his words. Jesus continued, "You have loved your own, but I say to you, love even your enemies. For when you love your enemies, you will find freedom in your soul. Do not let hatred control you. Let love lead the way, and you will experience the peace I bring." Everyone began to feel a lightness and warmth in their hearts. These words seemed not like a typical sermon, but a call to open their hearts and understand what true love is. Jesus was not saying that love would be easy, but he emphasized that love was the only thing that could save humanity from pain and conflict. Amidst the crowd, a woman stood up. She was a widow, with eyes red from past suffering. She asked Jesus, "Master, I lost my husband and loved ones in an accident, and I cannot forgive those who caused the accident. I don't know how to find peace in my heart." Jesus looked at her with eyes full of love. He did not judge but gently responded, "My dear daughter, I understand your pain. I do not ask you to forget that pain, but I want you to know that forgiveness is not for others but for yourself. Forgiveness will free you from hatred so that you can live in peace. Forgiveness is not about accepting the wrongdoings of others, but freeing you from the burden in your heart." The words of Jesus were like a wave soothing her heart, making her feel a relief she had never known before. The woman bowed her head and tears silently fell, but these were not tears of pain, but tears of liberation and peace. The crowd stood in silence. No one said a word, only quietly listening to Jesus' teaching. Jesus not only taught about forgiveness, but also spoke of unconditional love. He did not distinguish who deserved love. That love was for everyone, even those whom society considered undeserving of love. After a while, another man stepped forward. He was a man of high status in the village, but he was known for his arrogant and cold nature. He looked at Jesus and mocked him. "You tell us to love our enemies, but how can we love our enemies when they are always trying to harm us? How can we love those we cannot trust?" Jesus looked at him with patient eyes. He did not rush to respond, but calmly said, "Try loving, and you will see the true power of love. Love is not a feeling, it is a choice. You can choose to love, no matter how difficult it may be. And when you love, you will find that you will be the one who is free." The man stood silent, unsure of what to say. Jesus' words were not like ordinary teachings. They touched deeply into the soul of each person. Jesus did not come to change people's views merely through reason, but he came to change people from within, through love. The story of Jesus spread throughout Galilee. Wherever he went, his love and forgiveness also spread, changing the hearts of many people. But at the same time, a great challenge began to arise for those who followed him. Though they had heard and felt his teachings, not everyone easily accepted. One of the first to accept Jesus' teachings was Matthew, a tax collector, who was despised and rejected by society. Matthew had given up his job to follow Jesus and became one of his closest disciples. He knew he was not worthy of Jesus' unconditional love, but Jesus showed him that everyone could be loved and forgiven, regardless of their past. However, while Jesus was teaching such noble truths, another great challenge appeared within his group of disciples. One of them, Judas Iscariot, began to feel dissatisfied with the path Jesus was taking. Judas was someone whom Jesus had trusted, a man who had followed him and witnessed his miraculous works. But in his heart, doubt began to grow. He felt that he was not being properly valued, that his efforts had gone unnoticed. He began to feel resentment toward Jesus. One afternoon, as the disciples were gathered around Jesus, Judas secretly left. He met with the priests and religious leaders who had conspired to arrest Jesus. They promised him a large sum of money if he could tell them where Jesus was hiding. "What do you want me to do?" Judas asked, his voice low and filled with suspicion. "Just show us where he is and we will give you 30 pieces of silver," one of the priests replied. Judas looked ahead, his heart heavy. But then anger and disappointment clouded his thoughts. He made the decision to betray Jesus. That night, Judas wrestled with his decision. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but greed and the feeling of being abandoned made it impossible for him to turn back. The next morning, he returned to the group of disciples, pretending nothing had happened. Jesus knew that one of his disciples would betray him, but he did not criticize or judge Judas. Instead, he continued teaching about love and forgiveness. Jesus understood that no matter what Judas did, his love for him would remain unconditional, and that forgiveness was the only way to free everyone from the burden of hatred. One evening, during the Passover meal, as everyone was eating, Jesus suddenly said, "Truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me." The disciples fell silent, looking at each other in confusion. No one could believe that one of them could do such a thing. Judas looked at Jesus with cold eyes, while the other disciples wondered who would be the betrayer. Jesus looked at Judas, his gaze not filled with anger but with compassion. "Judas," he said, "you have chosen your path and I will not stop loving you, but you will have to face the consequences of your choice." Judas lowered his head but said nothing. He knew that Jesus' words were not a rebuke but a warning. Yet he could not turn back. After the meal, Jesus led the disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he prayed, desiring to do his Father's will. That night, he felt the pain in his heart as he faced the betrayal of Judas and the great sacrifice that awaited him. At that moment, Judas led soldiers to the garden. The soldiers approached and Judas stepped forward, kissing Jesus as a signal for their identification. But in that moment, Jesus did not respond with anger. "Judas, do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" Jesus said, his voice gentle but full of sorrow. But instead of condemning Judas, Jesus spoke his final words to the disciples. "We must continue this path, for it is love and forgiveness that are the way of salvation. Love, even when betrayed, even in pain." Jesus' words were not just teachings, but a manifestation of unconditional love, even in the face of the worst betrayal. In that moment, the disciples began to understand that love and forgiveness were not easy emotions, but a powerful choice. Forgiveness was a liberation from suffering and resentment. Jesus was arrested, and the crowd around him did not recognize the nobility in his actions. But even in the face of betrayal, he continued on his path, the path of sacrifice, of love, and of unconditional forgiveness. Jesus was arrested and brought to trial, where he faced baseless accusations and an unjust judgment. Even though the charges against him were unfounded, Jesus did not speak out in protest. He did not seek to defend himself. Instead, he remained silent because he understood that this was the path he had to take to fulfill the will of his Father in heaven. Throughout the trial, Jesus not only endured physical pain, but also had to face the betrayal of those who had followed him. The very disciples whom he had loved and taught now deserted him. One of them, Peter, who had declared that he would follow Jesus to the end, denied him 3 times when Jesus was arrested. Peter stood outside in the courtyard watching. As Jesus was being tormented in the trial, a woman approached and recognized him as one of Jesus' followers. She pointed at Peter and said, "You are one of the followers of Jesus, aren't you?" But Peter looked at her with fearful eyes and denied, saying, "I do not know the man." A little. While later, another person recognized Peter and asked again, "You were with him, weren't you?" Peter denied again, saying, "No, I do not know him." And for the 3rd time, when someone else accused him, Peter asserted, "I do not know him, I have nothing to do with him." At that moment, a rooster crowed. Peter remembered the words of Jesus when he had told him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Peter's heart broke and tears flowed down his face. He realized that he had betrayed Jesus, not through evil actions, but because of his weakness when facing fear. While Peter suffered with his own betrayal, Jesus never turned his back on him. Though Jesus knew beforehand that Peter would deny him, he still loved him as a true friend. Jesus' forgiveness was unconditional. He did not condemn or rebuke, but simply waited for Peter to return and find peace in his love. After the trial, Jesus was taken to be crucified. The soldiers beat him, placed a crown of sharp thorns on his head, and mocked him, saying, "So you are the king of the Jews?" They continued to strike and mock him, but Jesus did not open his mouth in protest. He remained silent, enduring not for himself but out of great love for humanity. When Jesus was nailed to the cross, a profound silence enveloped the area. He did not show anger or hatred toward those who had tortured him, but instead, he prayed, "For them, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Jesus did not ask for vengeance. He asked for forgiveness for those who caused him pain. In the ultimate moment of suffering, he demonstrated the most profound act of unconditional forgiveness, a message he had preached throughout his life. At the foot of the cross stood those who had followed Jesus all along, including his disciples. They were there, witnessing his unimaginable suffering, but in their hearts, they could not understand why he had to endure all of this. Everyone felt despair, as though the light had been extinguished forever. Yet, even in death, Jesus continued to teach about love and forgiveness. He did not let resentment or hatred take hold of his soul. Instead, he embodied unconditional love, and forgiveness was the only path to liberate everyone from fear and anger. Jesus did not die for his own sins, but for the sins of all humanity. He accepted the sacrifice, not to judge the world, but to save the world from sin and death. It was this sacrifice, this death, that would open the way to new life for everyone. Jesus died on the cross not only to redeem humanity, but also to teach them a great lesson about forgiveness and unconditional love. Before Jesus died, he spoke one last time. "It is finished." These words were not only the end of a journey, but the completion of a mission of salvation. Jesus had finished his work on earth, bringing forgiveness, love, and hope to mankind. When Jesus died, the sky grew dark and the earth shook. The soldiers standing at the foot of the cross witnessed all that had happened and exclaimed, "Surely this man was the Son of God." On the 3rd day after Jesus died, the sky remained dark, and everyone was in mourning and grief. Jesus' disciples, those who had followed him throughout his ministry, felt as though their hearts were torn apart. They couldn't believe that the one they loved and trusted had gone forever. Their hearts were filled with fear, anxiety about the future, and a sense of despair that enveloped everything. The teachings of Jesus about forgiveness, love, and hope seemed to have lost all meaning after his death. However, the miracle that Jesus had promised his disciples soon took place. Early on the 3rd day, before the sun had risen, a group of women who had been faithful to Jesus, including Mary Magdalene, went to his tomb to anoint his body. They came with sorrow and fear of death, unaware that the tomb of Jesus had been opened and that he was no longer in it. As they approached the tomb, a miraculous sight met their eyes. The stone that had sealed the tomb had been rolled away, and the tomb was empty, with no body of Jesus. An angel appeared sitting on the stone, and the light from the angel was as bright as the sun, causing the women to be afraid. The angel spoke to them, "Do not be afraid, for I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay." The angel's words were like a breath of fresh air, awakening hope in the hearts of the women. They hurriedly ran to tell the disciples that Jesus had risen from the dead. However, the disciples initially did not believe them, thinking that their words were just a fanciful story. As soon as the disciples heard the news, Peter and John rushed to the tomb. John ran faster, but when he arrived, he stood outside the tomb and looked in. Peter, with his fervor, rushed in first. They saw the linen strips and the cloth that Jesus had been wrapped in, but his body was not there. They still did not fully understand what had happened, but gradually they realized that a miraculous event had occurred. Jesus had risen. Peter and John returned, but Mary Magdalene remained at the tomb, unwilling to leave. She wept uncontrollably, her eyes filled with sorrow, when suddenly a man appeared behind her. She thought he was the gardener and asked him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, please tell me where you have put him, and I will take him." But the man turned to her and called her by name, "Mary." She turned and immediately recognized him. It was Jesus. She exclaimed with joy and amazement, "Rabboni," which means teacher. But Jesus replied, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene hurried to run and bring the good news to the disciples, telling them that Jesus had risen. When the disciples heard the news from Mary, their joy and astonishment were beyond words. The resurrection of Jesus was not only a miraculous event, but also the greatest proof of his boundless love and power. Jesus had conquered death, bringing new life to humanity. Jesus appeared before the disciples and said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." The words Jesus spoke to his disciples were not just a message of forgiveness, but also a call for the disciples to continue his mission, bringing love, forgiveness, and hope to everyone. The days that followed, Jesus continued to appear to his disciples on various occasions. One time, while the disciples were fishing on the Sea of Galilee, they saw a man standing on the shore, but they did not recognize Jesus. He asked them, "Do you have anything to eat?" They answered, "No." Jesus said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." When they did so, the net was filled with so many large fish that they couldn't pull it in. At that moment, John realized that it was Jesus. Peter, full of zeal, jumped into the water and swam to the shore. The other disciples brought the boat in and dragged the net full of fish to shore. Jesus had prepared a meal for them and ate with the disciples. During this meal, Jesus restored Peter, who had denied him 3 times, and Jesus asked Peter, "Simon, do you love me?" Peter answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus continued to ask him 3 times, and each time Peter answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." This was the restoration of Peter and the commissioning of him to become the foundation of the church. The resurrection of Jesus was proof of the boundless power of love and the divine authority of God. Jesus had overcome death to bring new life, to forgive humanity's sins, and to offer everyone a chance to live in eternal love and hope. The resurrection was not just a miracle, but a promise that life will always triumph over death, and love will never be defeated. The story of Jesus' resurrection is the story of forgiveness, victory over death, and eternal life. It is the message that Jesus wants to send to all of us. No matter the circumstances, no matter facing suffering or failure, the love of God and the resurrection of Jesus are the sources of hope and salvation for all humanity.